Did you want me to have a look at your script for the next video? Is it done?
Sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble finding my voice today.
Oh, really?
Actually, maybe you could help me.
Yeah? I'm sorry to hear it. What can I do?
You know, since I can't find my voice, maybe you could help me, I don't know, lead it here somehow.
Is that supposed to be another pun?
You know, lead the voice here. Help me do the voice leading.
Knut, if you want me to read your script, I suggest you get it written by yesterday morning. We are done.
In the previous video, we looked at how to create rich and resonant choral chords. Today's episode is a continuation of this, as you will, at some point, have to make at least one of the voices in a chord move, at least if the music contains more than one chord. However, it can be tricky to know exactly how to make this motion effectively, especially if you have more than one part moving at once. Not only do the individual voices have to make sense in order for the singers to be able to perform them, but you also have to consider the whole of the music when deciding how each part will move. This is where voice leading comes in. Voice leading, in its simplest terms, describes how a voice or part moves from one note to another, both on its own and relative to the other parts in the music. It's an important part of all arrangements, but it is especially so for singers, as they're almost exclusively dependent on their parts moving in a logical way in order to be able to perform them effectively. In other words, unlike guitarists and pianists, singers don't have frets or keys to help them find the notes. In the Western music world, the methods surrounding voice leading were codified around the 17th century in response to the demands of increasingly complex counterpoint in music. While the polyphonic music of the Renaissance possessed many of the modern voice-leading features, it was the growing popularity of functional harmony in the Baroque that really pushed for a more standardized method of achieving effective voice leading. Not only did the voices now have to work in relation to each other, but they also needed to follow and support the chord progressions of the music. This was, suffice to say, difficult to do without some guidelines to follow. Early studies of voice leading were done pretty much exclusively on how to achieve effective counterpoint in Renaissance styles, like motets and madrigals, since, well, they predate the Baroque, and functional harmony didn't really exist yet. An early study of counterpoint can be found in Giovanni Lanfranco's Scintille di Musica, published in 1532. More studies on counterpoint would follow as musical tastes evolved, though the most popular and important is undoubtedly Gradus ad Parnassum by Johann Joseph Fuchs, published in 1725. Now, you might be thinking, who cares what arrangers did hundreds of years ago? I'm not arranging a madrigal, I'm arranging a pop song by Adele. And yeah, you wouldn't use the exact same guidelines for arranging a madrigal as you would for arranging an Adele song. Unless the reason why the historical connection is important is that we still employ a harmonic language in Western music that is more or less the same as the one used during the 17th century. So there's a long history of established conventions for what sounds correct when arranging music that uses this type of musical language. While I'm generally all for pushing the boundaries of music, there's a time and a place for doing this. And doing it in an arrangement of a current pop song for a community choir may not be the best use of anyone's time. That being said, there are certain voice leading guidelines where counterpoint is concerned that may not be as useful for today's pop music, as counterpoint is used sparingly these days. But let's have a look at some guidelines that will make parts relatively easy to perform, as they'll be useful to you when writing the parts for your choral arrangements. Note that these guidelines will probably make more sense when you're arranging in notation rather than by ear. Fortunately, if you're arranging by ear, you're most likely going to make lines that are logical and have good voice leading anyway, simply due to the fact that you're singing them. So this is more to avoid certain voice leading traps that you can fall into if you're arranging without singing through the individual lines. Trust me, I'm speaking from experience here.
1. The line should move as little as possible when changing chords. This just makes it easier for singers to pick up, and the result should sound pretty smooth, as you'll avoid the sudden change in timbre that might accompany larger interval jumps. So, let's say your choir is singing a D major chord and are going to move to a G major chord. In this case, I want to have the root in the bass, so the bass just moves up a fourth, to G. The sopranos move up a semitone, resolving nicely to a G, and the tenors go up a tone to the third, a B. The altos are singing a D, which is a note that exists in both the G and D chords, so they can stay on that note. Since the voices don't have to move very far, this chord change should sound good, and be easy for the singers to perform.
Naturally, the exception to this would be if you're deliberately looking for a change in timbre, for instance, if you want a sudden loud chord. Putting it higher in the ranges of the singers will achieve this easily, as long as the parts move by logical intervals. Speaking of which...
2. If moving by a large interval, that is, anything larger than a fifth, proceed and follow with motion in the other direction. This helps with intonation, as inexperienced singers tend to go slightly out of tune when singing larger intervals. So using motion in the other direction will help them shift back into key if necessary. For example, let's say that the singers have to sing this line. While the line works functionally, the tenors have to do an ascending seventh followed by a step up, which can not only end up sounding a bit out of tune, but also requires a shift in register, meaning that the notes may stick out even if they're in tune. To avoid these problems, a line like this will work better. This will be easier for the tenors to perform than the earlier line, and will sound smooth and balanced. Note that I moved some of the alto notes as well to keep the F in the first chord, as I liked how it led down to the E flat. But if you really wanted the tenors to sing something resembling the first line, you could probably get away with this version. By moving down after the ascending seventh, it should just about work in this case.
Even if you're writing for a professional singing group, like the King Singers, you should still follow this guideline, as it means that the singers can focus their attention on other features of the music, such as the dynamics or the expression. You don't want the singers to have to hyper-focus on tuning, as the performance can end up sounding a little uninspired.
3. Avoid difficult intervals if possible. There are a few intervals that are difficult to sing, most notably the tritone and most intervals greater than an octave. Again, you might end up with a situation where the singers will have to hyper-focus on tuning if you incorporate these into your arrangement. For intervals above or just below an octave, these usually require a change in register, and so can be tricky to get in tune for that reason. The tritone is a different beast.
The tritone sounds like this. Ooh. It's named the tritone because the second note is 3 whole tones away from the first. Ooh. Ooh. It's an interesting interval, as the second note is as far removed harmonically from the first that it's possible to be, at least when using equal temperament. However, this is why it can be tricky for lower ability singers to sing it correctly. It's possible, but it has to be made clear from context, such as on a dominant chord, where someone singing the third should be able to move to the seventh without it being too difficult. I often find that tritone jumps can sneak into arrangements if arrangers aren't being careful while arranging block harmonies. And 9 times out of 10, there are easier solutions to the voice leading. That being said, it's a useful interval for creating tension, so don't be afraid to use it if this is what you want, and you can use it in such a way that it makes it as easy as possible for the singers to perform.
4. Avoid an awkward combination of tones and semitones. Scale-wise motion tends to work best. As musicians, we're hardwired to think of scales, as they form the basis of much of our practice. This is why getting a group of singers to sing a line that follows a major or minor scale is very easy, whereas making them sing a less obvious combination of tones and semitones is less so. Again, you'll want to avoid a situation where singers have to hyper-focus on tuning in order to perform the music.
Ideally, when writing lines that might pose a challenge, you should be able to sing or hum them yourself. You can test this by going away for a while and doing something else, then coming back and trying to sight sing what you've written. If you're having trouble, chances are your singers will too.
Finally, a tip on how to make the voice leading sound good when several parts are performing together. In the previous video, I mentioned that you should probably avoid parallel moving fifths between the parts, as they tend to stick out and can sound a bit stark. Other parallel intervals that are good to avoid would be parallel seconds, sevenths, and ninths. While these won't stick out like parallel fifths, they can still be a little confusing for many singers. The safest parallel intervals are definitely thirds, fourths, and sixths. They almost always sound good.
I must stress that this doesn't mean that seconds, sevenths, or ninths are bad or forbidden. It just means that they can be tricky to get in tune when sung in parallel motion, as anyone who's had to sing in parallel moving seconds with someone else can attest to.
Okej, är du redo? Okej, låt oss
Är
försöka.
du redo i frågan?
Det tror jag inte. Okej. Twinkle, twinkle,
Little star.
En gång till. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are.
Anyway, that's all for today. If you follow these tips, you'll find that your singers will have a much easier time learning your arrangements than if you're not. As usual, leave me a comment if you have any questions, and share this video with your friends if you think they'll find it useful. And I'll see you next time.